Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream are made possible by the generous support of PNC and the Raskin Family Fund, with additional funding from Cleveland State University, Robert Conrad, and the Payne Fund.
That was designed by an immigrant who moved to Cleveland. Good afternoon, and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. My name is Joe Simperman, the president of Global Cleveland, a proud member of the City Club, and a proud first-generation Clevelander, a son to Slovenian parents. First, please give me a moment of personal privilege to thank Dan Moulthrop for the incredible citizenship ceremony that was hosted today, and where we swore in 44 new United States citizens who came from over 15 countries to call Cleveland home. Thank you. I also want to take a moment. I want to thank Judge Polster, our federal court judge, who's opened the door for so many naturalization ceremonies to the general public, as well as to Keith Libman, a member of the Global Cleveland Board. We're very grateful for their support. We're pleased today to welcome to Cleveland today's speaker, the Assistant Commissioner for New York City Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs, Kavita Pawria-Sanchez. Kavita is the Assistant Commissioner of the Mayor's Office of Immigration Affairs in New York City, and someone from whom everyone in this room can learn a lot. She oversees efforts to promote immigrant inclusion across the city government, which is a very big, important, and vital task. Immigrants make up more than 35% of the population of New York City and more than half of the city's small business owners. On September 17, 2017, the United States will celebrate the 230th anniversary of the signing of the Constitution. The U.S. Department of Citizenship and Immigration Services celebrates that entire week and encourages all Americans to reflect on the rights and responsibilities of citizenship and what it means to be a U.S. citizen. In 2016, over 750,000 people became naturalized American citizens. And earlier today, as we just said, right here at the City Club, we welcomed over 40 people who became naturalized. And so you know, those naturalization ceremonies are open to the public, and we're proud at Global Cleveland to welcome them as we do every other week, 2 ceremonies a Friday, so the new citizens know that Cleveland is indeed their home. You heard earlier from Brian Upton, who I know would have wanted me to mention who the members are of the Refugee Services Collaborative of Greater Cleveland. And he's modest, but I will tell you this, knowing what I know about the United States, there is no other city that has the collaborative serving refugees that we do in Cleveland, and that's due to his leadership and the work of people like Janice Small. The organizations, and many of them are here today, are adult literacy and basic education programs in Parma and at Cuyahoga Community College, Asian Services in Action, Building Hope in the City, Cleveland Catholic Charities, the Cleveland Heights University Heights School District, the Cleveland Metropolitan School District, Cuyahoga County Job and Family Services, El Barrio, a project of the Centers for Families and Children, Global Cleveland, Lakewood City Schools, Neighborhood Family Practice, Ohio Department of Job and Family Service Refugee Services, the Refugee Response, the U.S. Committee for Refugees and Immigrants, and Us Together Incorporated. Please give these welcomers a round of applause. But as we all know, people come to our country in many different shapes and places, and they come here as refugees, as new students, as immigrants, as secondary migrants. Some of them even come here without paper. In addition to the incredible Refugee Services Collaborative, our region hosts over 6,000 international students, and we are on track to naturalizing as new citizens over 500 more people in Cleveland this year than last year. We haven't even begun to talk about the people who are coming here who originally came to another city, and we need to talk about it. Because under current federal action, with the executive order limiting immigrants and refugees from certain nations, and the phase-out of deferred action for childhood arrivals, the uncertainty in the lives of many of our sisters and brothers, many of our neighbors, is real. And when we start talking about limiting legal immigration, we begin to undo the fabric upon which this nation was built. It is in this exact context that Assistant Commissioner Kavita Pawria-Sanchez joins us today. She oversees interagency initiatives to advance immigrant inclusion across New York, and she has also served for 5 years as the Executive Director of the Office of Refugee and Immigrant Affairs at New York City Social Service Agency. She has spearheaded policies and strategies to meet civil rights mandates for over 1 million immigrant New Yorkers. We are very, very fortunate to welcome our sister here today to the City Club. Ladies and gentlemen, members and friends of this great organization, please join me in welcoming Kavita Pawria-Sanchez.
Thank you so much for inviting the New York City Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs to be here today. I had a wonderful conversation with Joe and Dan before I came up here, and just really got a sense of the flavor of Cleveland, the beautiful work that many of you are trying to do to keep our communities together, to strengthen your city. And in particular, the engaging space that the City Club has created. As you know, we're in one of the most difficult times in this country for many communities. Of course, I focus on immigrant issues for most of my waking hours. And have done so for the last 14 years or so. And I think this is the most difficult time in this country that immigrants have seen in a very, very long time. So it was frankly very difficult to step away from the daily work to come here today, but I am so glad that I did. I am feeling very hopeful. Thank you, Dan and Joe, for sharing the spirit of what it means to hold together in difficult times, and actually probably what the notion of America is about, that our rights, the Constitution, the laws we have fought for are more important now than they ever have been. And citizenship has taken on, I think, a particularly new, valuable, and powerful, not just feeling, for many of us and the 44 people who naturalized this morning, but for all of us to be thinking about how do we make this country live up to the ideals, to continue that project of building this country according to the Constitution and the heart that many of us hold in keeping those traditions alive and strengthening them. Because as we know, America has not always been, that America has been a project. So my name again is Kavita Pawria-Sanchez. You can tell that I'm now looking at my paper. And I'm just really, really pleased to be here. Thank you for inviting me. This is my first time in Cleveland, and just what a wonderful welcome and community. I'm feeling very hopeful, and I'm grateful for that because we really do need hope. More hope in this time. On behalf of the City of New York, we really are just so thrilled to join our sister city of Cleveland to celebrate citizenship on Constitution Day, in addition to, I think, the 44 people who naturalized this morning. Such an important moment. Congratulations to you. I'm not sure if any of the folks made it to the lunch today, but congratulations to everyone. As Americans, we are part of this ultimate nation of immigrants, and I'll use the term Americans broadly today as including everyone, whether they have citizenship or not, everyone who has come to this country for the stereotypical better life and to make their lives and this country a better place. Today, over 40 million Americans are immigrants, 40 million, which is actually a record in the nation's history. On a percentage basis, we have more immigrants here today than we have ever had in almost that we've had in almost a century, not ever, and which I think is a testament to the global forces that create migration, but the reason we can say that it's the most in a century and not ever is we know that this country, as Dan was reminding me, if you just even think about Ohio, it was built on immigrants. And so actually at one point in our country's history, there were predominantly immigrants here joining the indigenous communities that were here that we often do not talk about. This morning, the City Club of Cleveland helped carry forth a proud tradition by helping over 40 people take the final step towards becoming citizens, a step that can often be very difficult to take. I think there are 15,000 people here in Cleveland that are green card holders or legal permanent residents that have yet to take that final step. For a variety of reasons. And I know that from personal experience of the immigration path that one can take and the importance of becoming a citizen, particularly at this time in the country's history. I actually naturalized myself 2 months ago. Thank you. And I only share that because I sometimes feel guilty as a person of relative privilege. I only share that to share that I think the American story has just become more and more beautiful despite what's happening in our country right now. My parents are Indian. They immigrated to Canada over 40 years ago. So I was born and raised in Canada. I came to the U.S. 23 years ago for college, and I married a Dominican from Washington Heights in New York City probably 6 years ago. Together, we had a daughter who is both of her parents, right? So she's Indian, she's Dominican. For folks who know the term in the South Asian diaspora, Desi refers to all kinds of South Asians, and Latino represents my husband. So we joke, is Desi Tino. And actually, it turns out there are many of us, that there are many couples like myself and my husband, and enough to form social media networking groups and lunches and dinners, and some will say, well, only in New York, but actually I think it's all across the country, right? This beautiful new generation of Americans that break the mold, are not who we think of as Americans. My daughter will have a very different reality as the daughter of folks who are settled here. Versus what I think me and my husband experience as the children of immigrants, helping them navigate this reality. And so her concept of America will be very, very different. I actually think she will probably identify as a Brooklyner more than anything when it comes down to it. But I share that to also say, yes, this is the new America, but it's always been America. That is our history. Folks coming from all over the world, breaking bread together, creating families together, building communities together, and really strengthening this country in so many ways. There is a multitude of realities around what it looks like to be American, whether you're African American, whether you came to this country yesterday with papers, 20 years ago without papers, whether you're Native American or Indigenous. You know that rich or poor across every religion. I could go on, and that I see as actually a responsibility. I think my greatest takeaway from becoming naturalized, I think I actually showed up at that ceremony as somewhat of a checking of the box. And I ended up being naturalized by a judge who had some very deep principles around justice, and how I think the biggest thing he reminded us of was our responsibility to make America a more perfect union, that America is an ongoing and evolving project. And I think that is what we celebrate with Constitution Day, which I learned in doing my research for this talk was once called I Am an American Day, and is often called Citizenship, or is often also called Citizenship Day. I Am an American Day, as an interesting side note, was apparently conceived of by an Ohioan. So I'm learning wonderful things about Ohio in this process as well. Going back to the broader context, I think, of what we're talking about here today. So the process of naturalizing can be daunting for many. I'm a lawyer by training, and though I don't practice now, I found the process to actually be quite difficult, and had 3 different attorney friends look at my application before I sent it. It took me, I think, at least a month to put my application together fully. It costs hundreds and hundreds of dollars to do. You multiply that out. Some folks lose their nationality, their original nationality, and there are many reasons that 8 million Americans who are eligible to naturalize have not done that. So on one hand, that is a challenge for us to think about: how do we help 8 million Americans and 15,000 folks in Ohio, in Cleveland, and I'm sure higher for folks who are not counted in that number. How do we think about how to support more eligible green card holders in becoming citizens, so that they can more deeply engage with this, with your city, with your state, and with this country, to make for a better country for themselves and each other. Citizenship, it turns out, is powerful, not just on a personal level, but it also is a powerful tool. One of the things I mentioned is just the duty, the responsibility of contributing to your communities. And I think the personal power, I unexpectedly ended up leaving my naturalization ceremony with a sense that I have not had in my 23 years in this country, of feeling like I could start to feel at home. You do not have that feeling when you're on visas, or even when you have a green card for many years, and you can imagine all of the offshoots of that on a personal level. And the power that can come from that is not just personal. Citizenship grants legal protections. It is the ultimate protection from deportation. Having a green card is not an ultimate protection from deportation. Green card holders are deported every day, despite current mythology around that. And green card holders cannot vote. So citizens can vote, and often having citizenship leads people to better job opportunities, higher wages, and increased civic engagement. And so I think some of our work is figuring out, how do we not just help people become citizens, but become more engaged in their communities. And I know that City Club does really wonderful work on the engagement side. For individuals who naturalize, their annual earnings increase by an average of 8.9%, or over $3,000 a year. I will tell you that I have not yet experienced that raise, but perhaps I'll go back and ask for it. The employment rate rises by 2.2 percentage points, so it actually leads to more engagement in the workforce, and home ownership increases by 6.3 percentage points. Citizenship is important for cities as well. I think Joe referenced the contributions to city revenue and the 1 to 8 that you've found here. The better job opportunities and higher wages mean immigrants are contributing more revenue to city budgets in New York. That is in the, I won't even pretend to know the number, but in the cajillions of dollars for not just the city, but the state, and then stronger communities for all residents. We immigrants are not just about what we contribute economically, but about the ways that we strengthen the fabric of all of our communities over time. In New York, we've worked to tackle some of the barriers of what it means to become a citizen by offering free immigration legal services. We do that in several different ways. One is a program called New York Citizenship to sort of merge the identity of being a New Yorker, which is very strong for folks, and I get the sense that that might be true in Cleveland. The melding being a New Yorker with the act of becoming a citizenship. New York Citizenship is a public-private partnership that provides legal assistance with citizenship applications, as well as financial counseling through the New York City's library system. So you can go to several libraries across the city and get free legal help to walk you through the entire citizenship process. By partnering with private philanthropy, we've been able to increase the funding this year, allowing us to assist even more people to become citizens. And I think one of the ways that we've done our work in New York City, and I know this was referenced around the refugee collaborative that Brian spoke to. This all happens, all of this great work happens through partnerships, right? It is all about building alliances across constituencies, across sectors, bringing together the resources and the goodwill. So anything we do at the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs involves very close partners, whether that's with the faith community, with community-based organizations that have ties and trust with immigrant communities in their neighborhoods, as well as private philanthropy to support our communities. So one of the other ways we've done that is by building a broad legal services program called Action NYC. It's our premier program that serves immigrants on a diverse portfolio of immigration cases, so everything under the sun, not just citizenship, but to deportation defense, to becoming an asylee, to getting a visa if you're a human trafficking victim. Our program serves immigrants across the board for free, all across the city at community-based locations. And this year, particularly, I think, because of the federal climate that we're in, the mayor has hugely increased our investment in immigration legal services to $30 million. Which is the largest investment of any municipality in the city, because we recognize that legal help is, of course, just one piece of a puzzle. But it is of what folks need to have good lives and to contribute to their communities. But legal help is often, a foundational piece of that puzzle that is critical, particularly when we know immigrants often get caught up in seeing consultants or notarios or other sometimes well-intentioned people who want to help them but are not necessarily attorneys or accredited providers who can give that help. So we've really prioritized that, and it's allowed us in this new federal climate to pivot some of that existing infrastructure to helping dreamers. So now, as you know, the DACA program is gradually winding down. based on an announcement from the federal government last week. We're hearing the many ways that that political debate continues to happen on the backs and the emotions, the hearts of not just dreamers, but their families, and frankly, all undocumented immigrants and just immigrant communities, right? Many of mixed status families who maybe have a citizen, who have citizen children, but one parent without status. Our hearts are on the line in this political debate, and we are in the city now, frankly, in crisis mode, responding to the end of that program, helping folks who can still renew by October 5th, extremely harsh and fast timeline to help 30,000 New Yorkers, for us, approximately have DACA, to help those 30,000 folks make sense of what the end of DACA means for them, learn about what their rights are in that context. Not having status does not mean you do not have rights. Learning how to get alternative help, connecting with lawyers in case they are eligible for other types of relief that they may not have been aware of, and helping to renew by October 5th for the relatively small population of current DACA holders that will qualify to renew. So that is where we are in this moment, and grateful that we built this infrastructure to be able to respond. And I know that that is not always possible. The resources are not there in every city, and frankly, the burden of the errors of federal immigration policy often falls on cities. However, the federal government doesn't provide a ton of resources for cities to deal with the impact that are left for urban places like Cleveland, like New York, to make some sense of. I have worked in the New York City government for about almost 10 years now, and even in New York City, we've seen that investment increase very slowly over time. It doesn't happen overnight, but it is critical, and I think cities are stepping up in very beautiful ways around the country in partnership with organizations like Global Cleveland, with faith groups, with groups like City Club, and I imagine a lot of the folks who are here today to say, how do we bring our minds, our hearts, our resources together to address these issues. And that is true in New York City as well. It is not just about what the city has been able to invest. It is about a whole, a beautiful panoply of resources that have come together amongst partners across the board. I will end soon with a note again about a strange one, if you'll bear with me, about the resilience of immigrant communities. I think that when we often talk about immigrant communities, there is a sense from the outside of victimization. And what we are seeing in this time, and I'm sure you are too, is a fighting spirit, an immense amount of resilience, which is inherent to what it means to pick up your life and everything you know and move to another country and start again. That resilience shows in our parents, and in the dreamers. I think what happened last week is going to demonstrate and unleash a fierce movement of young people and their allies and supporters and people of all walks of life who believe in justice to really look for a better solution here. Our city is advocating for the DREAM Act in the short term with other cities, with all of our communities across the country and in our city. We will fight for the DREAM Act. We know the fight does not end there. There's, of course, millions of young people in this country who deserve status, and then there's many, many millions more who we need to continue the fight for. We are employing and plan to employ all of the tools at our disposal as one of the largest cities in the country to take on this issue, perhaps by legal means. Several lawsuits have already been filed to mitigate this action, and we've filed amicus briefs, and we'll continue to support those lawsuits. We'll file our own if we need to on this issue and on several others. But I would say the heart of the work that we are doing in this time is Know Your Rights forums. We've held almost 500 Know Your Rights forums across the city since January. Because we know that it is critical that we get good information out to immigrants in this moment on the whole host of issues around all of our rights. So I did say I was ending. I took that and ran with it. Apologies. But I will share another personal anecdote that I hope circles back to Constitution Day. And I will tell you that I listened to a video this morning of children who interviewed President Obama about what he thought the Constitution meant, why he thought it was relevant to this moment. And what founding father he would have wanted to meet. Super cute. If you want to see it, it's on the ACLU website. And it reminded me of this unexpected moment I had a few months ago. I went to a U2 concert in New Jersey. U2, obviously Irish, political on the international stage. And Bono repeatedly, probably 75 times in the course of that concert, said America in many different tones. So with a question mark at the end of America, with an exclamation mark, with a period, with wonder, with love, with a lot of love and passion that frankly, I wasn't expecting from an Irish rock band, and as a call to action. He talked about America as an ongoing project that we all are responsible for strengthening, whether we are Americans or we are not yet Americans, or however we define what it means to be an American, that America is a call to action. And so I leave you with that as we come upon Constitution Day. And thank you again for having the New York City Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs with you today.
Can you hang out a second? Today we are enjoying a Friday forum with Kavita Pawria-Sanchez, Assistant Commissioner for the City of New York's Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs, and we are just told by Mayor de Blasio's office that your raise is in the mail. We'd also like to remind her that here in Cleveland we look at America with a comma, and we're grateful for the words that she said. We're about to begin the audience question and answer, and we welcome questions from everyone, really. We want to remind you that your questions should be brief and to the point, and we want to remind you that your questions should in fact be questions. Holding the microphones today are Membership and Customer Experience Manager Corey Isler and Youth Forum Council Chair Tiolu Orsonia. May we have the first question, please?
Good afternoon. Welcome to Cleveland. Thank you for being here today. My question is, what is your primary mission in your position in New York City government, and what major obstacles do you face in fulfilling that mission?
That's a great question. So the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs has been around in many different iterations for a couple of decades. We were added to the city charter over 10 years ago, and so we're an office that is permanent and does not go away based on who the mayor is and where their values lie. And that allows us to have an institutional presence in the city. Our official mission is very broad. It is to promote policies and programs to integrate immigrant New Yorkers within the city. And so it's so broad that it has given a lot of space in this particular administration, which is quite progressive and is really dedicated to addressing issues of equality and equity within our city. And of course, because immigrants are a huge part of our city's population, you cannot address equality or equity without thinking about the various manifestations of what poverty means for immigrants, what health access means, what access to food, housing, what the criminal justice realities are for immigrants within the system or interacting with the system, relationships between police communities and immigrants. I could go on, but you think of every social and economic issue, and there is an immigrant face to it. So we have, I think, in a very dogged way, taken all of those issues and thought about what are the priorities, what are the critical needs of immigrant communities today, and how do we work with city agencies to, in particular, look at how immigrants are being served by our agencies, how do we include them in city government, and how do we be sure we're responding to their needs in a thoughtful way. And in New York, what that means is what I think of sometimes as turning a ship. If city government is a ship, turning that ship for us, it's over 300,000 city workers to think about city services from a different place. And so that's I see the scale, right? But no matter where you are, right, the work happens through your Department of Health, through your Department of Education. That's where our residents are engaging with city government. And how do we do that well? And we know that does not just happen from a mayor's office of immigrant affairs, right, where we're a small crowd of people relative to the size of our city and the size of our government. So we know that we must work with city agencies to infuse this lens of immigrant inclusion into the DNA of how they do their day-to-day work. So that's one piece of it. The other is we know that as a city, we have tremendous power to advocate at the national level. And so we do a lot of advocacy at the state and national level, actually, to ensure that the state and federal policies that are being put forward actually make sense and are thoughtful for our city's residents. So that's one piece of it. And then the third is access to justice. So making sure that our city's residents are empowered to get good legal help so that they can be most civically engaged and are on that road to having a different place in the equity and equality equation. I hope that answered your question.
From one Desi to another, welcome to Cleveland.
Thank you.
I became a citizen some 40 years ago, and since you have gone through the process recently, I would encourage you to talk about what it takes to become a citizen, how much you need to learn about the Constitution and the history of America. If majority of the Americans had to go through that test, I would venture that they would not pass it. So just describe that and how long and how much information you need to learn.
Sure. You are correct. It is not a intuitive test. So I can walk through the top lines of the process. There is it starts with a very long application that is available on the USCIS website and a very long set of instructions. You start with the instructions to determine if you're eligible. It also serves as a kind of a roadmap on what you need to get into order. If you do not have all of your affairs in perfect order, which frankly most people don't, in order to even submit your application and not raise any flags. So having all of your taxes in perfect shape, having a very clear sense of your criminal history and the records that show that if you have a criminal history in any way, even knowing all of the political affiliations you've had over time, you do list those out. So there's a long list of kind of backup, what I thought about as homework to get my application together, because the application is not just about filling out a very long series of questions, but also gathering a set of backup documentation that for me was an inch or two high. On what you end up needing to provide, from your original birth certificate, from your home country to perhaps your marriage certificate. It depends on how you're getting your naturalization, whether it's through marriage or having been a legal permanent resident or green card for a number of years. I won't get into all of it. There is a fee to pay. Then you do a biometrics appointment, which is fingerprinting and picture taking at your local government office. You do go through an interview with an officer that confirms all of the information on your application and asks additional questions in some cases, and gives you a verbal civics test to determine if you speak English. And there are some exceptions to the English language requirement, and for which you can bring in an interpreter. But they determine if you can speak English, if you don't qualify for an exception, and they conduct a verbal civics test. As I told you, was not raised in this country, and so a lot of those questions are not intuitive to me because they were not part of my cultural backdrop. But I did go to college and law school here, and I still had to study for many hours to feel totally comfortable with that test. And I will tell you that I still walked in not knowing all of the answers for sure. But it is something that you can prepare for, and that there are many tools out there to help you prepare. So it shouldn't be a discouraging factor. I think it's just something that requires some support. I think for some people, I did flashcards with a friend I had who was going through the same thing. There are apps out there that help you practice, and classes, community organizations and libraries in our city at least that provide classes to help you study. So it is not easy. The entire process is not easy, but it is absolutely doable. I think the key is having some support. In however that looks, whether it's family that can help you navigate, or a legal services provider or a community organization, even online, lots of help out there.
How do you explain what the real problem is and has been for the last 30 years? It's not President Obama or President Trump. It's best described as the sign from Barry Maguire's Eve of Destruction, House full of Congress, don't pass no legislation.
Wow. That is a fantastic question, and I think one that we have all been asking ourselves. Because you're correct, there hasn't been any major immigration reform in many, many, many years, regardless of who's been in office. How do you explain that? I would actually love to hear answers from the audience, but I think that might be challenging. I might have to get back to you. And if anyone does have the answer, I would love to hear it so that we can get on with it.
How does your office contribute to the debate about the issues of sanctuary cities, the issues about the link or the between immigration and crime that certain politicians are trying to exploit, and also about issues about public services in a city like New York and what immigrants are able to qualify for and what they're excluded from?
Yep, great. So I think there were 3 questions in there. I'll try to hit them all. Many city services, and I'm sure that's true here, are available regardless of status. Right, so there's, in our city, you can go to a food pantry, you can get emergency shelter, you have a right to go to school, there is emergency Medicaid and other low or no cost ways to get health care support. Immigration status in our city is irrelevant for purposes of engaging with NYPD, with the police, with fire. There's mental health services that are available regardless of status. We have a municipal identification card called IDNYC that's available regardless of status, and over 1 million New Yorkers have signed up for that ID card, which is of particular importance for communities that cannot get identification in other ways for various reasons. And we have very strong human rights laws to protect rights despite, or perhaps because of what's happening at other levels of government. So our message to the communities to our communities has been that we're not in the business of federal immigration enforcement. That's a federal issue. Our city is open and welcoming and committed to providing as many services as we can to our communities, to the extent that we're not constrained by state and federal laws that in some cases require status for eligibility. So, for example, food stamps or SNAP, or federal cash assistance, let's say. But outside of those programs, many services available, and so we are encouraging people to step forward and take advantage of those services in this time, knowing that we protect confidentiality to the extent of the law. We actually have an executive order in place at the city level that protects confidentiality, including immigration status, to the extent that we can by law, and that's been in place for many years, which I think has helped uniquely build a sense of trust. I think we all know immigrants often don't trust government for many good reasons. Some of those sentiments carried from back home, some of them based on realities of engaging with government in this country. And so we've worked really hard to build more trust with all communities, including immigrant communities, so that they do feel comfortable stepping forward to get immunizations, to have their children go to school, a very, very long list. On the sanctuary city issue, so we do consider ourselves, of course, an open and welcoming city. I think a very important fact that is often left out of the debate is that immigrants do not make our cities less safe. In fact, the opposite turns out to be true when you look at the crime stats. So crime has gone down in New York City in this administration, and we do not see a correlation between a crime increase and immigrants being in our city. And so that correlation that is often made in the federal immigration context of immigrants in your city leading to more crime is just factually absolutely not true. And I think it the more we get that information out there, the more powerful we'll be. We know, and I think this is what you're asking about, that the federal government has threatened to penalize cities that are considered sanctuaries for immigrants, and to take away federal funding. We have said that we will fight because we believe we are right, and that there is actually no lack of legal clarity, or clarity in terms of the reality that we see here. We're on strong legal footing. And I imagine that would apply to any city. And in this particular manifestation of the sanctuary issue, it's actually that the funding that would be taken away in New York, and I think this is true for other cities, is funding for police. So taking funding away from cities actually makes in this case, will make cities less safe. And we know that the overall policy serves to divide immigrants and police. And we know that also does not make us any more safe. So we're monitoring the issue closely. We are very involved in thinking through a strategy on defending what we think is very strong legal footing on that issue. I hope that answers it.
I have a Twitter question from the Mandel Humanities Center. What has been done to make the path to citizenship easier for immigrants?
Well, if you think about that, from the federal vantage point, it has not become easier. In that the form, I think, is about to get longer, right? And the instructions are about to get longer. I will say again that even as a lawyer, I grappled with the instructions, so that is not good news. However, I will say that the process is somewhat more streamlined in terms of engaging with USCIS, at least from my experience in our district. I actually got through the process in 5 months. Which I think is pretty fast. I was expecting it to take much longer. So there are some improvements that have been made, I think, at the USCIS level on actually administering these applications. At the same time, I understand that there was a huge backlog before the last federal election, which is quite troubling. On the local level, however, I think we've had opportunities to help people navigate that process so that it is easier from the public's perspective. I know that Cleveland is part of Cities for Citizenship, as is New York, and we work to do exactly that. Look at what the barriers are for becoming a citizen, and put into place programs and supports to help address some of those barriers.
Yes, good afternoon. Thanks so much for your disclosures. It's very helpful to understand the process through your personal, honest sharing. There's been a change over the years about how people on permanent legal cards have been treated, and I'm just wondering whether that changed to make it more difficult. Used to be with a legal permanent resident card, you could be treated more like a citizen, and then somewhere around 2005 or 2006, you were treated more like an outsider. And I was just wondering if that was a strategy to push more people to become citizens. Do you think the government wants that, or do you think, they're more suspicious of immigrants?
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure, and I feel like I have a before November answer and an after November answer. But I think one thing in terms of the change that is really important for folks to know is in 1996, as part of the massive welfare reform laws that I'm sure everyone remembers in some way or saw the impacts of in different ways for all of our communities. Part of that welfare reform included severely restricting immigrant access to benefits, particularly for legal permanent residents. And so that was very deliberate to ensure that immigrants were not benefiting from this country's safety net, or to reduce that at least. And the second really important change is that those laws created a new infrastructure of laws that made it easier to deport legal permanent residents if they committed even the smallest type of crime. Now, not all crimes committed by legal permanent residents lead you to becoming deported. The federal government defined what would lead to that in their own way, and that continues to be a set of laws that has led to the deportation of hundreds of thousands of legal permanent residents since '96. I don't know the exact number, though. I apologize. So I do think that was a huge turning point in this changed reality. But at this point, I think in terms of pre-November, post-November, a little hard to completely characterize what the specific impact is on legal permanent residents. But I think in some ways it's more of the same and more difficult. Thank you.
Today at the City Club, we have been privileged to enjoy and learn from a Friday forum with Kavita Pawria-Sanchez, Assistant Commissioner for the City of New York's Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs, truly. Today's forum is the Karen Faith Witt and A.H. Weinstein Memorial Forum on the Persecution of Peoples, made possible by a generous gift from the Norman H. Weinstein and the Friends of the Karen Faith Witt. We have Karen's sister, Ellen Botnick, with us today. Ellen, would you please stand? We want to thank you for joining us. Thank you so much. We thank all of you for being here today. It brings us to the end of today's forum, but the beginning of this conversation. Thank you, Ms. Pawria-Sanchez, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This forum is now adjourned.
For information on upcoming speakers or for podcasts of the City Club, go to cityclub.org.
Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream are made possible by the generous support of PNC and the Raskin Family Fund, with additional funding from Cleveland State University, Robert Conrad, and the Payne Fund.